Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Coffee with Steve this fine Monday morning. It's April 22nd, and it is 3 days past my birthday. That's right, I am a very old man. I'm now 40 years old, so happy birthday to me, right? Well, let's drink some more coffee here and try to get the day started, shall we? Hmm. Let's hit that intro video. So I thought I'd start out today, uh, kind of some bad stuff. Um, I recently did a video, as most of you guys know, and that video was on the 737 Max that had crashed in Indonesia. There was also another one that crashed in Africa previously back in October. They were both 737 Maxes, and in both cases, they determined that there was this system called the MCAS that had essentially caused an altitude adjustment by the plane automatically to basically point the nose of the plane down in order to gain airspeed. Because what was going on was according to what we're getting, the sensors on the sides of the plane, one of them was bad and had indicated that there was a completely different set of pitches from one side to the other. And this caused the MCAS to just automatically go into a nosedive to try to gain more airspeed. Okay, it's just kind of one of those. It automatically does this without pilot intervention in order to try to avoid pilot error, essentially. Because there has been a history with air flight that engines can easily stall under certain circumstances because the pilots can get panicky. And it's not on pilots, right? This is not a pilots get panicky, therefore we all need to just fix this. The by and large majority of pilots understand their aircraft well enough that this isn't really a problem. But I mean, the safety of the industry really requires that something be done about it. So they have this MCAS system. It's called the Max, and they installed it on these 737 Maxes. Now, there's been a lot of there was a reconstruction. There was a patch that was essentially put out to these things, and I can go over. I've been doing a lot of reading and trying to catch up on this. Well, trying to get caught up on what's going on with the MCAS system. What is the patch notes? What are the patch notes of what they're going to be doing to implement on this system? What caused it at first? Like, why? What? To me, the biggest question is, how did the flight control system get into this state in the first place, right? But before I dive into any of that, I want to address a comment that was very recently posted, just over the weekend, on that video. And I don't want anybody to go after this guy because I think he's got a very valid perspective on this. But I did think it was important to address this comment that was posted by Jeff Infeld. It says, 25 minutes of blaming software developers for all those deaths because you assume a commercial aircraft manufacturer has the same standards as a supermarket chain. So let's their developers decide for themselves how many AOA indicators to check. I'm only in a lowly Java Spring Boot batch JPA Hibernate dev, barely into his fourth decade of software development. So he's totally respectable. I mean, he's got 40 years of experience in the industry, which is more than I've got, and probably more than anybody else watching this video. But I'd never be so arrogant as to compare myself to the CADA guys, which Ada is actually the programming language, and C is also another potential programming language for some of the hardware that's in the Boeing. Boeing has stated that they are now like 99% Ada. So anyway, with the CADA guys working for Boeing, much less call them mass murderers as you do, when you, with all your experience in the aerospace industry, tell everybody that bad code was at fault and blame the coders, not the architects or BAs or managers for hundreds of deaths. That's a big call, and honestly, I'm staggered you have the decency to pull this video. The fix reads like a requirements change to me. Flight control systems will now compare inputs from both AOA sensors. If the sensors disagree by 5.5 degrees or more, with the flaps retracted, MCAS will not activate, an indicator on the flight deck display will alert the pilots. And he does go into what the software updates do expose. So this is what the update is, the new maneuvering characteristics augmentation system, right? The MAX that we're talking about. So let me just, and we can dig into some of the details on that, but I just kind of wanted to respond to this because I definitely respect Jeff's perspective here. Is it a big call for me to say that the software developers that were behind this were in some way responsible for the system, or I should say responsible for the failures of the system? And to me, the bottom line is yes, right? Like, we wrote it, right? Not just me. Obviously, I didn't write it, and others, the people who are working for Boeing, were the ones that wrote it. And I am in no way saying that they did anything malicious. I don't think that they even did anything really wrong, right? I don't think that they did anything with other than the intention of trying to fulfill the requirements that were placed upon them. And this is the constant pressure that we feel as developers across industries. So his comparison of, what's going on with Boeing versus working at a supermarket, I get his point. I totally understand the perspective. And I'm not in any way saying that those two industries are totally comparable and that the regulations are the same. That's not what I'm saying at all. The pressures of the job are the same. We have bosses that tell us that we need to do these things, and we have to hold ourselves accountable to them and what their requirements are, right? That's kind of what we are. That's what we're doing. And the thing that I am trying to be some sort of a bulwark against, trying to prevent, is that us as software developers, we are building these systems that are mission critical to a lot of our infrastructure right now. This includes airplanes, this includes automobiles, all the way to the hydroelectric dams that are being built and being worked on. And what we are continuously doing is being put under pressure to meet certain deadlines by management that doesn't necessarily let us fully figure out what the potential issues and problems could be. And this is not... In this specific industry, I'm not alone in this, okay? There are industry experts within aerospace that are very cautious about this, that are saying, look, we've got to have some sort of better way of we can't let Boeing management push the developers to implement something so quickly for business purposes, because these are, again, mission critical systems. But what do we as developers have is that, no, I'm not going to do this. No, I'm not going to just let myself be bullied around by the management, right? That's where I'm coming from. I'm saying, what are we going to do as an industry to help protect our fellow developers from getting this criticism that it's their fault? What are we going to do about that? And to me, I think we have to have some set of standards, right? Just like in almost every other professional industry, there is a set of standards that says in order for you to be a professional in this profession, you must have X, Y, Z. I don't know what those standards are, okay? I don't know what they are. It doesn't even really matter what they are. What does matter is that there is a system in place by which these developers that were working for Boeing, okay, and they implemented a system. And again, I don't necessarily know that they would have even been able to find this thing, right? I don't know that they would have even been able to detect that this was a problem or that there would have been a problem. What I am saying, though, is when management comes and says, you need to fulfill these requirements in XYZ amount of time, and that amount of time is not enough to adequately assess the potential problems, the potential pitfalls, we as developers have to be able to say, no, I am not going to implement a system without proper thorough review or proper thorough testing, right? We have to be able to say that. Or no, I can't do that because it violates my ethics as a developer. It violates my standards as a developer, right? And that's the same thing that lawyers have, that doctors have, right? They have the ability to say, I am not going to let you collect information about my patients because that violates my doctor-patient confidentiality, right? That's just an example. There's certain standards. As doctors, they treat everybody. I am not going to let this person die just because I may have a moral difference of opinion with this person. I mean, people who commit heinous acts are still operated on by doctors to save their lives because that is the ethos that they have accepted as being a doctor. I'm going to try to do my best to save everybody, regardless of my personal opinion. That's the kind of standard that we have to implement as developers because we are now starting to get into this very critical area. We write software for everything. Like everything in the world pretty much has some degree of software associated with it. We've got to do something about that. We have to have some set of standards that if somebody tries to violate our ethics, tries to tell us that we have to do something that we potentially know might be unsafe, right, is not something that is something we can do with good faith, then we have to have the ability to say, no, absolutely not. A good example of that is what happened with Volkswagen, right? With the Volkswagen and the diesel fuel. I forget exactly what the problem was, but it was they were saying that one of their vehicles had a diesel fuel that was exceeding the expectations essentially of the European and United States standards. And they were doing this basically through software. They were cheating. They had completely now been identified as cheaters to the system. They were writing software that essentially, while it was under test, they would change the emissions of the vehicle in a certain way, but it was not very fuel efficient in the way that they were doing it. And so they were essentially lying to the government through software because they just figured, if we could do this, if the software engineers can figure out a way to solve this problem, then let's do that and not necessarily meet the actual expectations and standards. Which means a manager at some point went to the software developers and said, here's the problem, implement a software solution for it. And they did, right? The software developers figured out a way to cheat the system. They knew what they were doing. You can't tell me that the software developers that worked at Volkswagen didn't know exactly what they were doing. They were trying to find a way to game the system so that when it was hooked up to the environmental checking system, I don't know exactly what it's called. I'd have to go research it. But when it was hooked up to the system and being tested by the governments, then it was emitting a certain amount, but it was reducing the fuel. Then when they would go and do road tests, they suddenly discovered that the emissions, and there's very few of these devices to check out emissions on road tests, but once they got it hooked up to that, they discovered, oh wait, this thing is being way more pollutant when it's not hooked up to our typical testing systems. And so they were discovered. But a software developer or several software developers had to have figured out that this was the answer, that we're going to build some software that while it's in this state, the car will have these certain, will act under these certain conditions. And then when they are taken off of that system, then it will behave in a completely different system, in a completely different way with more power. There was a lot of trying to point fingers and blame in that situation, and that included an investigation by the United States Congress in order to try to investigate what was going on with these cars. And they had the North American president of Volkswagen get up on the stand and say that it was the software developers who did it for some reason. Right? They did it for some reason. That's the position that software developers are constantly in, right? It's the management telling them what needs to be done, what needs to be implemented, what the client specs are, what the scope of work is. And the software developers are just trying to do their jobs to get it implemented. I don't think that these Volkswagen developers did it with any malicious intent. They're just trying to do their jobs. They want to keep their jobs. Because the bottom line is, if that manager comes to them and says, you will do this, you will implement a system that cheats and gains the system in some way, what is the recourse of that developer? There isn't one, right? The developer has to say, yes, sir, yes, ma'am. You can't say no because they'll just get replaced, right? Just let me go find some other developer that will do it and doesn't have this industry standard to uphold, doesn't have the moral standing to say, no, I'm not going to do that. So we as an industry have to really say, as a group, as a whole, we are going to adhere to these standards, because that way, that developer who would say no in that situation is protected and can say, absolutely not. I will not implement this system without, because it violates my code of ethics. And by the way, because this code of ethics is universal amongst developers, and this, in order to become a developer, you have to adhere to this, you're not going to find anybody else to replace me that'll tell you yes, right? That's the kind of situation that needs to occur, or at least it'll be really expensive for you to find, I guess, black market developer to do this for you. Okay, so this goes back into the 737 MAX, because this repeatedly, over and over again, what I'm seeing in a lot of the response from the industry experts is, there was one article I definitely want to point out that was, where'd it go? I think it was Wired, yeah. So the writer of this article, Alex Davies, at least I think, I swear this was the right one. Was it? No. I'm sorry. I had it lined up here and I forget which one it was. Oh yeah. So this is where they have this one quote that I found kind of interesting. So if the pilots had known that so what they were talking about in this article was that the Lion Air flights, the MCAS was engaged when it shouldn't have been, and the pilots apparently didn't even know that this MCAS system was even in the plane. And that was, Boeing had actually released a statement saying that, I think it was Boeing. I want to make sure I get this right. Or the text repeatedly tried to pull nose back. Well, anyway, they had released information, and I'll give you guys links to this so you guys can check it out yourself. But I don't want to waste your guys' time trying to find something. But essentially, Boeing had, I'm pretty sure it was Boeing that had released a statement saying we didn't want to overwhelm the pilots of these planes with too much information or too many things to think about. So we didn't even tell them about the MCAS system. And then when the MCAS system went faulty, then they didn't even know that was the reason. All they knew was all they knew was what the plane was sending back to them as information, right? As you're a pilot, you can imagine anybody just sitting there holding onto the yoke and trying to figure out, why is this plane in a nosedive when I'm pulling back, right? Or when I'm trying to give thrusters, why am I, or when I'm trying to pull back on thrusters, why am I gaining airspeed? Like, what are the reasons why this is happening? And basically at that point, all you're doing is you are trying to fight the computer system that's not giving you proper information, right? You're obviously in a physical nosedive, but the plane is acting and behaving in a completely different way that's contradictory to what you're actually witnessing, and you can't do anything about it. You're what they call behind the computer. Okay? And there was kind of this interesting statement that so if the pilots had known the MCAS was at fault, they could have shut down the plane's ability to automatically adjust its trim, which determines its position in the air. So they could manually do it themselves, but they ended up behind the airplane, confused and trying to figure out what the computer was up to. When you're behind the airplane, you're almost dead. Okay, and that's unfortunately what was happening. Oh yeah, here we go. So maybe because they didn't even know the MCAS system existed, the jet's manual, Boeing had not noted its presence. The company had worried about inundating average pilots with too much information and significantly more technical data than they needed or could digest, which I totally understand. Like, I get why that decision was made, because pilots are in a situation where they are really they're not really flying the plane much. Like, I've got a couple of pilot friends, and they tell me that in those more commercialized jets, what they're dealing with is more or less just trying to manage a computer system. They're not really flying the plane. They're just managing a computer. And if you don't know that a system exists on a plane and it's the one that's causing this, what are they supposed to do? But Boeing not giving that information is kind of like we think that the system is so managed that you don't really need to have this information. You should be fine. Like an MCAS system is designed to automatically engage only when there's trouble. So yeah, why would you need that? Under normal flight conditions, it's not something you even have to worry about. All you have to worry about is how you're going to do, your pre-flight, your takeoff, your landing, and you're at altitude. What are you going to do in order to make sure the systems are running? Anyway, there's just a lot of. I'm just going to go back to this point, and I'm probably going to start turning into questions here in just a moment. But if we, as an industry, do not, it doesn't even really matter at this point. Who is at fault? Okay, it doesn't really matter. I'm not trying to point fingers in this. I'm not trying to say who should be the ones that are culpable for this situation. Okay, what I am saying is that we as developers are going to consistently get the fingers pointed at us, because in some way, shape, or form, yes, we have a responsibility to what's going into these systems. We are the ones writing the code. We are the ones programming it. We're the ones that are doing the actual work of making these things happen. And that means we're the easiest targets. We are the ones that fingers can be pointed at. And I admit, I'd sometimes point the fingers and say, what are you going to do about that? What are we going to do about that? I'm pointing me at me in this case as well. What are we going to do about it in order to fix this problem? And I think until we come up with some sort of set of standards, right? Whatever they are, I'm not even trying to advocate for any. I have my ideas about what they should be, but until we come up with something that the developers themselves can say, this is what we're going to stick to, we don't have any way to push back against the management teams that are coming to us saying, these are the requirements, get them done. And we have no way of saying, I can't do that. That's beyond what it is to be a developer. So, all right, I'm going to open it up to questions here, guys. I'm going to send you guys a bunch of links in the comment section. You guys can go check it out. I don't want to inundate this live stream, and it's kind of too bad that it's such a somber thing for after my birthday. I probably should have done something a little bit more lighthearted, and I apologize to you guys, but I just thought it's again really, really important that we do this open conversation about this, right? We have to have the conversation. I know a lot of you guys, heck, when I did the 737 MAX stream, I lost the most subscribers of any video in like the last year, right? I'm looking at the statistics. I lost like 9 subscribers just because of that one live stream, because people don't like to talk about this. But I think it's so vitally important to our industry that we do, because if we don't, we're going to continue to get put into these situations where we don't have the ability to say no to somebody, right? Okay, so Texture Tree says, hi. Hello, Steve. Hello, Texture Tree. And I am so sorry that it's such a sad, somber video. I wish I was doing something a little happier. Usually I'm a little happier about stuff. Pal Guy says, hi, Steve. Hello, pal. Joseph Scott Adams, 39, says, GM, good morning. Good morning to you, too. Pal Guy says, happy belated birthday. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate that. And I see a bunch of you guys, Kent, the Truth Sayer, all saying happy birthday to me. Thank you so much. Yeah, 40 is the big number, man. It's weird to be this old. It feels like just yesterday I graduated high school. Okay, so I'm not getting a lot of questions on this. I know, once again, I'm seeing viewers drop off because nobody really likes to talk about this stuff, right? It's heavy stuff. Who wants to talk about it? But I think that we've got to, right? We have to, because our industry is positioned to be one of the most influential and therefore culpable industries in a lot of cases where things like this can happen. And right now, we don't have that thing that says, I'm not going to do this because it violates my standards. It violates my ethics. We can do it individually, but then our jobs are in jeopardy because of that. So I hope everybody understands that point. And I understand, Jeff, like, dude, I appreciate that you even come and check out the channel. I don't know if you're going to watch this video. You're probably one of those mad people that unsubscribed and never, might even, I don't know if you can block a channel, but whatever. I appreciate that there's a lot of different perspectives on this, and I definitely don't want to just blame one of my fellow developers on this, right? I don't want to just say it's your fault, because that's too easy, right? That's too easy of a way of kind of reassigning blame, and I think that it's also very easy for management. It's more or less the public's eye, I think, is what I'm mostly concerned about, is what is the public going to view of this? Because the more these things are going to continue to happen, right? So long as software developers are implementing software systems in critical areas of our infrastructure and people die as a result of the software, whether the software is behaving exactly as it's supposed to or it's not, it doesn't really matter. The fact that software developers wrote this code and made it happen means that the public eye is going to be shifted towards the developers. And unless the developers have some sort of set of standards that says, I'm not willing to do XYZ without, these things in place. I'm not going to do what my manager tells me because it violates my ethics. Or, no, we need to have proper testing implemented. Or we need to have, and that could be beta testing. That could be, so it's part of acceptance testing. It could be part of whether it's unit tests, right? I'm not going to write any code without some sort of full coverage of unit testing. If we set aside some sort of standards that allows developers to say, I'm not going to implement this system in this time frame because it's not going to allow us to do proper systems checks on what we're doing. That's what we have to get to. Because if we don't, we're going to continue to see these systems. Even if we do, we're still going to see failures, right? We're still going to see these large-scale catastrophes happening because of software implementations. It's just inevitable, right? Because we make mistakes. And even if we don't make mistakes, we can still have circumstances that are not understood, right? Not anticipated ahead of time that cause problems like this. And I think that's exactly what happened here, right? It's like everybody had the best of intentions all along the way, but we can't see into the future, right? We can't foresee what's going to happen with these systems. So unless we have that thing to say, this is the standard that we held ourselves up to, right? This is what we are holding ourselves up to, and you cannot force us to violate those things, just like they have in nearly every other professional industry. And right now, we're gonna start to see the squeeze happen more and more on the developers, and the fingers being pointed more and more towards the developers until we implement such a system, right? Some sort of way that we can kind of push back against the public opinion that at some point is going to turn back towards the developers. Because yes, they're going to blame Boeing, right? They're going to continue to blame Boeing, and Boeing is doing. I think if you look at the statements that Boeing is putting out, they're trying to do an admirable job of saying, look, we totally get it. We're doing everything that we can to fix this. Is Boeing going to get sued? Probably. I would imagine they probably will. I don't know what their defense is going to be. I don't know. But here's where that danger lies. What is Boeing going to say in their defense? It was these developers, right? Or are they going to say it was management? It was us, right? Are they going to say, oh, it was us from the top level? We were pushing and telling the developers that they needed to go do this stuff. Are they going to basically do that? Or are they going to say, well, the developers didn't do proper testing, or the developers didn't properly fully flesh out the problems? Right. And then what do we as developers have to say as the pushback? Right? We're not the ones that are going up there on the stands and saying X, Y, Z. Okay. Again, I'm looking at this from a pretty 2,000 foot level, or 10,000 foot level. I totally understand. And I'm not real familiar with all of these systems. All I know is like the MCAS was programmed in Ada. Ada is a interesting programming language. It's actually kind of a lot like BASIC. It's interesting. Okay, SAA Consulting says, happy birthday and good for bringing up this. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. Kent Dutro says, to start education would have standardized. Yeah, there's some different directions we could go with the standardization. I think we need to start out with similar to how there are, in order to become a doctor, you have to have a certain amount of education. And I'm not saying that we need to have that education in place, but there needs to be some level of education, some sort of testing, some practice, because you're about to work on a human life, right? And I think that we need to take it as seriously as that in a lot of, maybe not every industry. Like if you're going to get into this particular specialty, and maybe that's what we do. We break it apart according to specialties, right? If you're going to be programming in this area, if you're going to be working on infrastructure at all, you have to pass these certain standards. And right now, those standards are either the businesses that have those requirements to build those items, to build those things that are part of the infrastructure, or it's the government, but they're not setting a standard for our industry. They're setting a standard for what the job needs are, right? And they're trying to do their best to find the best personnel. But again, if somebody who is the best person for the job says no to somebody, there's a good chance that person might get fired. And they'll go find someone who'll say yes. So, Kentro says, it took aircraft standardizing some 40 years to be implemented. I see the same for software. 2030, you'll government certifications for developers. Yeah, that's what I'm afraid of. I'll tell you, it is kind of what I'm afraid of. I don't want the government standardizing us. I don't want the government to implement this. If we have a system in place ahead of time, the government can just simply adopt that, right? If we say these are the standards that we as developers uphold to, and then the government starts pointing fingers at us, we can say, look, here's already a set of standards that we have, and then we get to dictate those terms. I don't want the government telling us, I don't want any government telling us as developers what our standards have to be. Because I don't know about you, but I certainly don't trust any government to tell me or my fellow developers how we should conduct ourselves. All right? I don't think that should be a government operation, because how many of them even understand the technology? Like, if you watch the Facebook when Mark Zuckerberg went up in front of Congress and had to testify, there was questions that were coming at him that were just like, are you kidding? What? How is this even a question in this? You're a complete idiot, right? Like this. How do I get my email through Facebook? So there's people that don't even understand the technology, and they're going to be the ones telling us how to do our jobs or what our standards should be. And that is the worst case scenario. We don't want people who don't understand dictating to us how it works. And they may get advisors, they may get special advisors that are in the industry and bend their ear and tell them, but that just means that it's the people who are best at getting a political influence that are going to be in those positions telling them how to run our system, what our system should be that we operate under. And those are going to be companies like Microsoft and Apple and Facebook and Google, and all the big names are going to that already lobby like the U.S. I'm just talking about U.S. politics at this point, but obviously I think globally the bigger names are who they're going to consult. So those who are already lobbying, now all of a sudden you have a position where those big name companies are going to be able to start dictating how the rest of the industry operates, right? These are the set of standards. And I can easily see a situation where certain languages, like, are you allowed to have a programming language? Are you allowed to invent a programming language? No, not anymore, because unless it gets standardized through the government, that language is no longer approved. You can't write something in that, okay? So that's one area. Like, how would we come up with Rust if we were under that circumstance? And a lot of people love Rust, but that may not have ever happened under a situation where the government is dictating what languages somebody can utilize in order to build applications. Sergeant Doom Viper says, "What is your opinion on software piracy?" Ooh. What is my opinion on software piracy? All right. Obviously, it's bad. Okay. I think that software piracy is there's a lot of work and a lot of effort that's put in order to build these systems, but I think in a lot of cases, especially when you're talking about like the terms of service and the agreements that you have to have in order to operate the software, there's a lot of pushback against that, right? Because I don't want to have to give up all of my data in order to run this application. And sometimes you have to pay gobs and gobs of money just to even install the thing. And then you find out, oh, it doesn't even do what I want it to, but too late. You've already spent the 10 grand or 15 grand on it. So that's a big problem in the industry. I personally, I like the shareware model more than anything else. I like the 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. Try this product out. If you like it, then go ahead and buy it. I think that's the best way to operate. When it comes to the piracy that's, shipping your software, especially like when China's doing it, they're one of the worst offenders about software piracy. It does create a bit of a problem for the software developers in order to make money in the industry, right? I think that in some ways, though, the piracy is also a good marketing tool. I view it in much the same way that I saw like the days of Napster. So you had songs that the industry didn't quite know how to deal with the fact that songs were being released or they were being ripped off of discs and then distributed freely amongst the people. But the thing that you got was the best songs were the ones that were the most popular were really the ones that everybody liked, right? It started to create this culture of, hey, I can just get whatever song I want and I can play whichever song I want. And based upon that, I'm just going to build my own playlist. I don't have to go buy a record or a CD that's got 12 songs I don't like just for the one song I do. And I'm paying, $15 for this disc full of songs I don't even really care about. But what ends up happening is you start to have more and more popularity of certain artists and certain songs. And it becomes, even though it's illegal activity, it's actually advertising. It's like it becomes this way of advertising this stuff out to the various people who enjoy the entertainment. And so they start sharing these songs, right? You start sharing all of these songs, and now you start to get artists that are more and more popular because of songs that are actually being pirated. It becomes kind of this advertising tool for those artists, despite the fact that the record companies are not making the money because they've got the industry based upon this model of selling CDs. So they go after Napster, right? They go after Napster in order to try to stop this. And really, it's kind of interesting to me also, like I still go back to Napster all the time because I think it's the quintessential situation of where the government basically said, just because you're facilitating the ability for somebody to do things illegally, that makes you culpable. And to me, I hate that mentality. I think it's the worst possible outcome. That was the worst possible outcome of that decision, was saying that Napster is responsible for its users. And I think we're still seeing that kind of effect ripple throughout. Nowadays, it's like Facebook and YouTube and Twitter are all responsible now for the content of their users. And like the European Union with Article 11 and Article 13 is once again telling these larger companies, you are responsible for the content that your users are posting on your platform. It's going back to that same thing. And it's terrifying to me that that's what's happening with that industry as well. When it comes to pirated software, it's really, really a problem for the developers who are releasing this stuff, trying to come up with ways of making a profit, right? But it also means you've got to increase your security. It means that you have to get better at encrypting it. It means that you can't just release something that can easily be broken, right? Like it can't be cracked. It can't be easily distributed. It should have, the simplest way is to just have it called back to your, like an online server in order to validate the license. And that's probably the simplest way to do it. That it's not 100% bulletproof, but it certainly is a lot more effective. Is, have the software call back to home and validate the license. That can obviously be overwritten, and there's a lot of kind of cat and mouse in there, but there are ways that the developers can implement something to make it harder and harder for pirators to pirate software. And if you don't do that, if you don't put those measures in place, then it becomes easy for it to be pirated. But again, that's not always a bad thing. That's not always a bad thing, because if your software can gain popularity through pirating, is that necessarily a totally bad thing? If 5 people pirate your software and the 6th person buys your software because everybody else is talking about how good this stuff is, well, at least that's a sale, even though those 5 people didn't buy your product, right? And those 5 other people that didn't buy your product, or that pirated your software, who's to say that they would have actually bought your software, right? I think that's a metric that is too easy to point at and say, well, if these people who pirated the software would have actually bought it, then we'd be billionaires. That's not the case, right? The majority of people who are going to pirate software are not going to pay for it in the first place. They're just not going to use it. And so therefore your application doesn't even gain any popularity. All right. I know it's a weird take on things. Anyway, I think software piracy is bad. Okay, I don't think you should do it. I don't think you should be pirating software. But at the same time, I think that we shouldn't judge it too incredibly harshly, because I think there's a lot of good that still happens in there, even though it sounds like piracy, you're stealing people's property. Yes and no. Like, again, you get some level of advertising, and the more ubiquitous your software is, and people pirating it will, at some point, maybe if they like it so much, will actually buy it, right? Like, you do a great job of this, but they just simply can't afford it. They can't afford to pay the costs, and until they get their business off the ground, or they they get in a better situation, they're not going to be able to afford it, so they wouldn't even know to use it. All right. Stephen Rawafa says, happy birthday. Thank you very much, Stephen. Appreciate it. Sergeant Doom Viper says, I didn't know it's your birthday. Sorry for not saying it earlier. Happy birthday. Well, thank you. Yes. It's not my birthday today. My birthday was on Friday, actually, but we were off because it was Good Friday, so I didn't do a video. Ja Ribeiro says, 8 years ago, I published a C# desktop app for soccer coaches. After some updates, my app was cracked because I forgot to obfuscate my code. That's right. I thought that my gains were over. Wrong. I fixed the mistake, and my sales doubled for 2 to 3 months because some of the pirate downloaders became clients. That's my point. You illustrated it exactly. It's easy to think, I'm losing all of this money. I'm losing every single one of these copies of my software that's going out, that's being pirated, means I'm not going to make any money, right? These are dollars that I'm losing. Not really. It's actually advertising. Yes, it's a bad thing to do. You shouldn't do it. But I also understand that there are circumstances that some people fall under where they can't afford it. They simply can't afford it, or they don't want to pay for something up front. That's a very common case. I don't want to pay for something up front that I don't even know if it's going to solve my problems. Does it work the way I want it to? But then you get them so hooked on it, and then later on you fix those problems, like Jiao is talking about. You fix those problems, and now all of a sudden you start gaining those clients because your software started to gain some popularity. Sergeant Doom Viper says, what about if money is an issue? And money is an issue for who? The person pirating or the person writing the software? Stephen Rawafa says, what would you consider to be a reliable governance framework or model in software development to give users reasonable assurance on the reliability of development software solutions. Okay. We have testing, right? We have this process of unit testing, acceptance testing, systems testing. We have a process. So there's 4 different types of tests. Okay, I'm gonna stick them in. There's lots of other types of testing too, but they kind of fall under these 4 categories. You have unit testing, which is the fine-grained testing of each individual function, right? Like not just what it's supposed to do, but also how is it supposed to behave under the wrong circumstances. We call it the happy path and the sad path. Okay, like happy path is everything, all the input that comes from the user is exactly how it's supposed to. The sad path is somebody's doing something really stupid. How do we respond to that? But you have to have both, right? You have to have both the happy path and the sad path covered, because you can't just have a system break because somebody entered in something incorrectly. So we have unit testing that kind of tests the lowest level functionality of the class and of the methods to make sure that they behave and respond as best as possible. Then you have integration testing, which is basically taking 2 parts and making them fit together, 2 or more parts, fitting them together and making sure that the systems operate exactly how they're supposed to. Then you have systems testing, which is basically, it's kind of like alpha testing. It's kind of the QA level where you're checking to see, is everything from top to bottom functioning the way it's supposed to in a standard usage scenario. This is how I expect my application to operate when XYZ is happening. And you have special QA testers that go through, and they have all sorts of different kinds of ways that they can run these tests in that systems testing phase. And then there's finally acceptance testing, which is basically where you kind of release it out as a beta to the public, and the public at large is kind of testing it. The users of your application are making sure that everything is working. But notice that we're testing, right? We're like all the way down to the lowest level functionality of the application is being tested, all the way up to the acceptance testing at the end. Our users are implementing it, testing it out, trying it, and giving us feedback. That whole standardized process of testing is important. Now, there's a good case to be made that something like TDD, like test-driven development, is a good way of going about to ensure that all of the testing is done on all of the different areas. You get 100% code coverage that way. And having your code coverage at a certain level before your product is released, I think is an easy metric for us to implement. I will not have software released without having this amount of testing. That is, those are for systems that are critical, right? I think that we can easily categorize software that is just like, I'm having fun, I'm enjoying, I'm learning, I'm trying new things, I'm testing things out. Does that require a lot of testing? Probably not. If I'm just trying to write a hello world application in Ada, do I need a whole bunch of, do I need to go through some testing frameworks? Probably not from the beginning. But the earlier that we start implementing testing in our process, the better. Do we have now a situation where we say, under these certain, in these industries where we're implementing software, or maybe even if it's a programming language, maybe the language itself says, in order for you to be a developer of Python, for example, you have to have these standards of testing. It can be very opinionated, maybe language-based opinionated, but I think that it more industry-related. If it is an infrastructure critical system, it absolutely must 100% have this amount of code coverage for testing. It needs to go through a workflow of people who go through a QA assessment of this. It needs to obviously goes through the FAA already for any of these metrics to be put in. And then also we have to think about the process of, when do you start a new product? Okay. In a lot of what I was reading about the Boeing 737 MAX problems was that they're taking an old frame with old hardware, and they're upgrading the software. They're adding a patch to the software, in order to try to make better fuel efficiency. Okay. And does that necessarily work, right? Are we going to be able to take this old equipment and say, we're not designing from the ground up in order to build something that's that's a more fuel efficient aircraft. We're going to take the old systems because it's easier to just simply retrofit them with something in order to make them more fuel efficient. Is that necessarily the best practice? And are we as software developers willing to accept that? Again, I don't know. There is the software craftsmanship, and I think I mentioned this before. There's the software craftsmanship manifesto along with the Agile manifesto. Those are some good steps towards this. But maybe we just simply have something that is like a bar association, right? Just like in order for you to get accepted, you have to go through some steps. You have to go through some testing. And then when you come out the other side, and that includes ethics testing, right? That includes that ethos that we need to have. And then go through perhaps even a panel that says, let's check to see where you're at. And then if you can pass that, then you move on and you become a professional developer. I don't know that that's the best solution. I honestly don't. I'm just throwing that out as one potential direction we could go. Sergeant Doom Viper says pirating. So what about if money is an issue, pirating? I'm still not sure what you're asking me there. What about if money is an issue? Again, do you mean what if money is okay? So I think you mean from the person who is doing the pirating, right? What if money is an issue? So obviously you are stealing, okay? Like you are stealing from a software developer because that software developer spent some time to go build that thing. Now, I understand that if you don't have the money and you have to pirate in order to get your work done, I still think that that's a totally wrong thing, but I understand it, right? I hope that comes across the right way. Like I understand the circumstances and the situations that people will get into. And so they go and they pirate software in order to get through a troubling time. That doesn't make it right? It's sort of like, if you steal, and this is hardly a good comparison, but the kid on the street that steals a loaf of bread from a merchant, is that the right thing? Is that the good thing to do? Is that the proper thing to do? I mean, the kid's starving. Does that make it right, though, that kid is then stealing from the merchant who put the time and the effort in? I think what we really need to establish is a set of I think that what needs to happen is the software manufacturers, the software developers have to come up with a better way of reaching those people who can't afford the software, right? I think that in much the same way that we offer charity to that kid on the street that steals the loaf of bread, we have to have some sort of outreach that says it's okay, we're here to support you, don't steal, that's the wrong thing, but we have a way for you to get something that you need to get what you need in order to go through. And if software development studios started saying, we're going to offer, if you can write us and tell us why you deserve this software for free and why you deserve to be in this, to get this program for free, and offer up, 100 versions of the software, or, start offering, like saying, if it doesn't even have to be a specific limited number, but if you write us and tell us your story about why you need this software for free, we might just give it to you, right? Have some avenue, have some way for people to go and get the software that they need. And maybe sometimes once in a while you just say, hey, we're going to issue 1,000 free copies. Like if you're the first 1,000 customers is going to get our software for free on this next update, right? That's the kind of thing that you could do as a software development studio to kind of fill that gap of where pirating is kind of getting from. But again, it's wrong, right? It's not what you should be doing. You shouldn't be pirating. I understand why. I don't condone it. I don't think it's the right thing to do. But again, I kind of understand why. I do. I really do. All right. And then I'm going to end it here with Kent Dutrot's last comment here. Says, if testing was so great, we wouldn't need so many updates. Ideally, you don't release. So if your testing is good, I think testing is done very poorly in a lot of cases. If you do good, proper testing, then the patches that you release or the updates that you release should be feature oriented, right? We're adding this new feature to the system. That's what we're pushing. Or, someone has come to us and identified that there was a behavior that we had programmed in properly, but we've realized that maybe there's a better way to go about this, where there's some sort of contingency we didn't quite understand. So for them, like those are the ideal ways that you release updates. If you are releasing updates that are constantly bug fixes, if you release an update that is nothing but bug fixes, like that update is all bug fixes. And I'm not talking about like a small little bug fix, like, if you're just doing a small little build, if that does have some fixes, that's always going to happen, because builds typically are about bug fixes, and then you have a minor release which releases at least some new feature or a improved feature. But if you're releasing a minor version that is nothing but bug fixes, there's a very big problem in your development procedures. Okay, you need to be building better features. You need to be adding value, constantly adding value, continually adding value. And if all you're doing is fixing bugs, you are not in a proper software development cycle. Okay. Stephen Rafat, I am going to have to end it here. A recent client of mine inquired if our software development is compliance certified by some internationally recognized organization, something like ISO. Yeah. The Business Software Alliance, the BSA, they're pretty common. I don't know that you could say that you're BSA compliant, just basically meaning I'm not pirating anything. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to have to end it there. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining me on my, I guess this is my birthday broadcast. And unfortunately, we're talking about something really, wow, we went from 737 MAX and how somebody really didn't like the fact that I was saying that we need to do something about this to people talking about software piracy. That's great. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, guys. I do appreciate it. And thanks for coming to the Coffee with Steve. I'm glad that I'm starting to see some of the numbers bounce up a little bit for these things. And I'm glad you guys are enjoying them. If you guys have a topic that you want me to talk about, if you have something that you'd like me to discuss, please feel free to drop me a note in the comment section below a video like this one. And also don't forget, you can join up as a member. It's just $5 a month. And what you get with that is you get $10 off, 10% off in my Teespring store. You have a direct access to me. There's a form that you can fill out that you can ask me questions and stuff, and I can answer directly if you're having problems with your software, if you're having, your database isn't working, whatever it is. We can kind of actually start an actual dialogue instead of just trying to do it through comments. And then also, I try to mention you guys, at the end of every video that I do, and that reminds me, every time I do this, I got to remind myself, I want to go and take a look and see who is my current set of members. And I want to thank them all for being members, because you guys are awesome. Without you guys, a lot of this stuff wouldn't be possible. So, who have we got? We have Olabayu Olasakan. Thank you very much. Boy, it's still, you got to be getting close to 2 months now, I guess. Mrs. CYI, I'm so fly. SAA Consulting. Thanks for joining us today, by the way, Steve. Rishi, Kanan Krishnan, For Technical, Samuel Niktesi Tabiri, Jim Griggs, HRU Bricks, Ron Howe, Cormac Kinan, and Kent Dutrot. Thank you so much, everybody, for being members. You guys are awesome. I really couldn't do it without you. So thanks for joining. Thanks for joining me today. Thanks for joining for the channel. And I hope to see you guys tomorrow morning for the same time, 7:30 every day. Bye-bye.